Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Hello and welcome to Road to Recovery, advocacy and insights for trucking accidents with Sagi Shaked. Sagi is founder of Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation cases, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements in damages for his clients. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is To Settle or Not to Settle, Navigating Truck Accident Claims. Sagi, welcome back.
Thank you, Kevin. Look forward to this one.
All right, to settle or not to settle. What are some of the common misconceptions that truck accident victims have about settlements versus trials? And how do those misconceptions or misinformation affect their decision?
Yeah. So sometimes you see or you hear clients come in and they tell me or other, people on my team, other attorneys on my team, my Uncle Joe got millions of dollars for this, or someone got millions of dollars for that, or they just hear stories, or sometimes you see these verdicts that are, astronomical. You'll see $100 million verdict, but it's a paper verdict, meaning they're never collecting on that. The reality, what you see with paper verdicts, people just getting verdicts against defendants or people they don't even have defense counsel. Those don't really mean anything. So when we come talk about misconceptions with settlements and trials, most cases settle. There are cases that for some reason, one reason or another, maybe the defense is being stingy with the money or they just don't see the liability and they don't pay and have to go to trial. But if you have counsel that is not afraid to go to trial, but actually knows what they're doing, which is a difference, there's lawyers and there's lawyers, right? What do I mean? There's a car that'll take you from place to place. You can get the Kia of cars or you can get the Ferrari or Lamborghini of cars. That's a difference. There's a difference between lawyers. You'll still get to the same place, but you won't get to that same result, right? Some lawyers have the license to file a lawsuit, but they don't have the experience. They haven't been in the courtroom. They haven't tried cases. They haven't taken beatings. Now, obviously, you're with a younger lawyer or a lawyer that doesn't know what they're doing. You don't want to be the one taking the beating, so they're learning on your dime. That's not what you want. You want someone who has the experience, who's been in the trenches, who knows what they're doing. So settlements versus trial, again, most cases settle if you have a lawyer that knows what they're doing and you get fair compensation for your case. And if the case goes to trial, just make sure that you have a lawyer that's qualified to try the case, that's board certified. If you're in Florida, by the Florida bar, that's had trucking cases before. So misconception that every case goes to trial. It doesn't. Most cases settle. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah, and I think that most truck accident victims or accident victims would prefer a settlement just to not have to, as long as it's a fair settlement, so that they don't have to go through a lengthy trial. Can you talk about some of the benefits of settling a truck case out of court for the victims and maybe some potential downsides of settling a truck accident case instead of going to trial?
Yeah, so let's do the benefits first. So the pros or the benefits of settling a case, you know exactly what you're getting. You know the amount is basically set in stone. You don't have to worry. There's no gambling, and you get resolution and you close that chapter of your life. Whereas a con would be, let's say you're going to trial. Now, that could be also a pro going to trial because sometimes insurance companies and the defense lawyers, they misvalue cases, or they just think they want to settle everything on the cheap. They think it's like a flea market and someone's pain is for sale on the cheap, which is not fair. So if they're offering you fair money, then you settle the case. But if they're not, then your equalizer is a jury and getting in front of a jury and going to trial. You shouldn't be scared about going to trial. If you have a good case and you're credible, you're going to win. It's just a question of how much and, what kind of lawyer do you have? So pros of settling, you get a fixed amount. You get it usually within 30 days to 60 days, depending on what issues you have with the closing of the case. And you're kind of put that chapter to bed. Whereas in a trial, you have your trial, you're going to win, but there may be an appeal. There may not be an appeal. If there's a bad faith component to the case, there may be another trial on bad faith. And that's a whole talk in and of itself. So the downsides, it could take a little longer with a trial because you have your trial. There's also the gamble of a trial, right? Because if you go to trial, maybe a jury doesn't see it your way. That's a possibility. But that'll all be based on the lawyer that you have and what the lawyer is telling you. Obviously, in our firm, we won't take a case if we think we're going to lose it. What's the point of taking the case? So we only take cases that we think we're going to win because we want to do right for our client. If it's a case we're going to lose, we'll tell the client, don't file that lawsuit. It's not worth your time. And then a lot of times they listen to us. A lot of times some people learn the hard way. They go to other lawyers and they lose. So hopefully that's not the case for people that we tell them that, but it happens. So trial, you get no guarantees, whereas settlement, you get that guarantee. That's kind of the differences between the two.
What kind of factors do you look at when you're trying to consider or you're trying to advise your clients about whether they should go to trial or whether it's better to settle?
It depends on, what kind of case you have. So in trucking cases, is it a clear liability case, meaning clear that the defense is at fault? And then we also look at what are the injuries and are they offering you fair value for your injuries? Or again, are they trying to do, they think it's flea market prices? So if it's a fair result and that's kind of what the going rate is or going, settlement amount, then you say, okay, that sounds like a fair amount. Now, sometimes defense lawyers, they try to bully you and say, this is outrageous. You're asking for way too much money. Other firms settle this for, 1/10 of the price. That's good for them. Good for the other firms if they're settling for 1/10 of what we want. That's not my problem. You're going to pay what we want, or a jury is going to tell us what we want. So, and most of the time, the juries do the right thing because we come in there and we ask for reasonable sums of money, given the type of case that it is, and the juries do the right thing. So I 100% believe in the jury system and what the jury does. And so long as you have a good case and you're not scared and you have some experience doing these types of cases, you're going to do well if you have a credible client. So it's all about credibility with these cases.
Do factors like the severity of the injuries or the complexity of the case influence whether a truck accident case is more likely to settle or go to trial?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you have a more severe injured client, they obviously are going to get more money, or they would be entitled to get more money. So the question is going to be, what are the injuries, how long lasting they are, how interfering they are with the person's life, what's the frequency of, we'll call it pain, the severity of the pain, the intensity of the pain. Those are all things we want to know about our client. And then you can make a decision, is this a fair settlement? Or is this something that a jury needs to hear because the insurance company is trying to lowball us? And if they're trying to lowball us, I could tell you from one of our last trials, we were close. We're only $100,000 apart. And, we were at 125, they were at 115. We couldn't get the case settled. And we ended up going to trial. And the jury gave us $6 million and they did the right thing. So It really depends on the case. And sometimes, and the insurance company gambled and they lost because it saw the value of the case. Mm-hmm. We were willing to compromise, but if you're going to make us try the case, we're going to seek the full value of the case. And that's what happened in that case.
What are some of the things that the defense lawyers or the defense in general will look at that will make them think that they have a better shot at trial?
So if they think your client's not credible, if there's we'll call it warts on the file, right? If there's something that stinks about the file, meaning there's some bad fact. Obviously, if your client's at fault, you probably shouldn't have taken that case. But if you can't relate the injuries to the crash, that's a big problem. If your injuries are minor, everybody's entitled to their fair day in court. But if you don't have any injuries, don't go try the case. That's a horrible mistake. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on the severity of the injuries. The more severe the injuries are, the more likely it is the defense will want to settle the case, or they get scared of going to trial because you're talking about, give you the example in our last case where you're $100,000 apart and the case should have and could have settled, but they decided to roll dice. They're the big bad insurance companies. They've got unlimited amount of money. And now they had to pay a lot more money because they made a mistake in analyzing the case. And in that case, I basically told them, I'm like, just get this case settled. Do you really want to go to trial on this case with the potential exposure on this case? And they truly thought that, they were going to win. In fact, they told the jury that they should award us nothing, and they were clearly wrong. So that can happen. And that came after, right before we had settled, right after we had settled our big case that we settled for in excess of 9 figures. Here I am, I'm coming up to a trial. And I'm like, these guys just need to settle the case. We're not doing this for money. We're doing this because this is what the client deserves. Pay the client the money. They didn't want to do it. So then we ended up going to trial. And 6 days later, the jury did the right thing in that case.
It's almost unfathomable that they could make a mistake of that magnitude, that they could be that wrong about, to squabble over $100,000. Now $100,000, I would like $100,000. That's a lot of money to me, but
Me too.
to an insurance company, it's nothing. So like to gamble that amount of money and then lose that big, it's shocking to me.
And it happens a lot. And sometimes they take chances and they win. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes they take chances and they lose. And I think they have a better chance of winning when you talk about the smaller cases, meaning the cases where the injuries are a little bit smaller or not as big as some of the other cases that we have. And that could really, they could take a beating. It's dangerous for them. But if they're willing to roll the dice and take a chance, we're willing to roll the dice because I believe in the jury system. And I believe juries do the right thing when they listen to the evidence and you present it in a right way. They're not going to hurt your client if your client's credible.
And it just feels, I think we've talked about this before. I know we've talked about this before, but it just feels like they would have to really convince a jury to side with an insurance company. You know what I mean? Like, I think you just, we're all probably more likely to lean towards a victim than we are to some big, massive corporation that has $1 gazillion. So it was a miscalculation for sure.
Yeah. And so in Florida, now every state is different. Most states are like Florida, but in Florida, when you sue, let's say you get into 2 cars, get into an accident and you get hit by John, right? We'll call him John Smith. You're not suing John Smith's insurance company. You're suing John Smith. And so when you go to trial, they don't hear the word insurance. We're not allowed to say the word insurance in trial unless you're suing your own insurance company. So the jury doesn't know, especially the younger generation who hasn't been around for a long time. They haven't had the experience of having a case or being involved in a case. And so they think John Smith is the one that has to pay for the judgment or the verdict. And it's not the case. Your insurance company will pay for, John Smith's insurance company pays for that verdict. So if you're ever in a trial and you're listening to this and you see a defense lawyer on the other side, rest assured that defense lawyer is being paid by the insurance company, and that verdict is going to be paid by the insurance company. Now, again, we spoke about earlier about verdicts where there's no defendant on the other side and nobody's defending it, and you see $100 billion. No one's collecting on those cases. It's just nice to put on your wall, but I don't know why you would want to put that on your wall if you don't collect on it. I see the attorneys in town doing that, where they advertise verdicts they never collected on. I guess nobody knows when you go on their webpage, but attorneys in town know. So, what I would say is if you got a case, go try it. Try it. Show the insurance company that your client is credible, your client's believable, and you're going to win that case. And that's what we do here. If we have a credible client, I want to get them fair compensation. And if the insurance company is lowballing them, we're going to go to trial on that case and they're going to have to pay.
What factors go into calculating the amount that a client receives in a settlement?
It depends. How much insurance is there on the other side? How did the crash occur? What are the injuries? Did they go to the hospital or did they go to treatment right away? How bad are the injuries? How interfering are the injuries with life? How does it impact them, right? Mm-hmm. So we had a client who had a traumatic brain injury, but it caused them to have fatigue syndrome. So this is a guy that used to work, 16 hours a day, 15 hours a day, no problem, 5-6 days a week. He was a working machine. And then suddenly after the crash, you see him sleeping while he's at work, which he never did because we had his former employees and coworkers testify that he never took naps. And here he is, he's fallen asleep. He can't stay up since the crash. And we're not just talking about 1 week. This is for 2 years in a row. We had different coworkers testifying or willing to testify. They would take pictures of him sleeping because they thought it was so funny and put it on a group chat within the work. As here he is again, he's sleeping again, and he never did that. They thought he was getting old, but you don't get old from one day to the next. It happens over time.
Gradual, yeah.
Yeah. So that case, we were able to show it. So it really depends. What can you show to the jury? right? And what can you show to the insurance company? Because merely saying you have an injury, that doesn't get you paid. You really need to show it and how it impacts someone's life.
For clients considering a trial, what should they expect during a truck accident trial, and how is it, how does it differ from the settlement process?
So for the settlement process, like you would go, sometimes you get the case settled without a mediation. Potentially the attorneys can send a demand package and then you start negotiations with the adjuster or with the defense lawyer and the case will settle. Or sometimes you file the lawsuit and you can settle during the lawsuit. You can settle at mediation when both parties come together and they try to resolve the case. The plaintiff, the person bringing the lawsuit, will put on their case. The defense, they're defending the lawsuit, will put on their case, and then you separate into different rooms and you attempt to settle the case. And sometimes you do it at mediation, sometimes you don't. And sometimes cases settle before trial, sometimes in the middle of trial, sometimes even right before the jury comes out, we've settled cases. So it really depends. Getting ready for a trial and how to make that decision, it's really, is the client comfortable giving up whatever sum of money that the insurance company is willing to offer? Ultimately, we can't force them to offer anything unless we go to that trial and, get a jury verdict. That's the only time you're really going to force them to pay you. Otherwise, they can string you along forever. So until you get in front of that jury, which is sort of what I would call the equalizer. Why? You have a billion-dollar company going against, let's say, my firm, right? I'm not a billion-dollar company. They're billions and billions of dollars. Not yet. We're getting there. So, they've got billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, and they can put you through the ringer. So the beauty of our system is the jury system becomes the equalizer. So we get in front of that jury and they don't get to, come in there and all the money in the world isn't going to help. You know why? Because in Florida, 6 strangers are going to come together and they're going to stand as that equalizer. They're going to tell that big corporation, you can't do what you did. What you did is wrong. Now it's time to pay. And so that's the beauty of the system. It equalizes, it makes the little guy, the people who we represent, we get, put on fair footing. Yeah, they can spend all the money in the world they want, but it's one case. And so there's only so much they can spend on the case. And there's only so many experts you can get. And we'll line up with any insurance company on that and we'll go to trial. And the jury will surely show them what's right and what's wrong.
That's awesome. Well, the system works sometimes. All right. Well, thanks for tuning into Road to Recovery, advocacy and insights for trucking accidents with Sagi Shaked. For more information or to connect with Sagi, visit shakedlaw.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Sagi, thanks so much for being here. Always great chatting with you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.